closer would probably be better. Yeah, that's good. A little faster would be good. Alright, let's overtake them.
turn it down.
All right. All right.
Then I'll bring you right back.
This is a good distance.
Good distance?
This gives us like the whole boat. But if you want to go across the bow again, that would be great.
I'll try to get in front of him a little bit so you can get the full sail. Still a good distance?
Yep.
Breeze. Yeah. Puffing it out.
You think the red one is St. George? Like, isn't that across to St. George?
St. George, does he have a line? I'm going to turn it right back around. George's got a line. Okay.
No, I thought there was a cost.
Good.
There's a, I thought there was a version of it. I will have to find out when we go see.
I got a southwest breeze coming up, so it's perfect for going upriver.
Let's do a couple circles,
Sure.
just real quick, so you can. You can probably gun it a little bit more, JC, if you want.
Closer?
No, gun it a little bit more, but not closer. Farther would be better. A little bit farther. A boat length or two width.
You want a full wide circle?
Yeah.
Make it turn now.
Yep. And let's gun it, see if we can see what it looks like if we go pretty quick.
Make one large circle.
This is the dark side, so you can gun it a little bit more if you want. Stick it around the front if you can.
Okay. Same distance out.
Yep. You can go a little quicker.
What?
You go a little quicker.
A little quicker.
Or alongside. Let's go run straight past. Go run straight past.
Faster?
Yep. Faster.
I'll bring it around and back it up. Take it right by the skirt. You want it?
All right, good. Yep. Why don't we run up around the port side? Pretty quick. Keep going, it's good. Faster. Take me all the way around. start heading in front of it. Okay, take me around.
Are you going to switch sides or?
Yeah, well.
I don't know. Other.
All right, JC. Same thing.
Yeah. You ready?
Yep. You can go a little quicker if you want. A little wider. Yeah, just need to be a little bit further from the boat. I can wait for him to go by.
Yeah, I guess those sails need to move according to the wind direction. Yeah, I mean if it's just
Yeah,
right
they were
distance,
just
if
way
it's fresh
Yeah.
from a different direction, I guess they gotta go.
You're right. So, JC, they do the, where's that measurement?
Right there.
Oh, JC, that's the
You mean when they're doing depth? You know when you want to start.
Now let's
close to it. I'm going to have to cut it back close to the wing.
Okay.
Get distance.
Yep. A little bit further out from it. And then cut into it in front of it. Who didn't?
It's better than a day at the office.
That's right.
I agree.
We'll see you
Thank you very much,
there.
sir.
This is my office.
Yeah,
All right,
we'll see
take
you
care.
If you don't mind, can I ride along with you from Whitehaven to Salisbury?
I think so. George White is coordinating that. Talk to George White.
Okay. You know George?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll check. And what time are you leaving Whitehaven?
11 o'clock tomorrow.
All right, thank you very much, sir.
I'll come right across.
That'd be super. That
All right.
to acknowledge on there.
Okay.
How would you like that to look?
Starting. Hi, my name is William Gates. I am the master or captain of the Maryland Dove, a museum ship from historic Salisbury City. My title actually is maritime curator, but that's because I work for a museum. And it means that I'm in charge of the maintenance and supporting the educational program that uses this ship.
Good. And the museum that you are associated with?
So we are Historic St. Mary City. We are a public nonprofit of the state of Maryland, administered by the governor. And our museum is at St. Mary City, Maryland, which is no longer a city, but it was the capital for 60 years, from 1634 to 94. And as most of you know, the capital was moved in 94 to Annapolis.
Any hard feelings there?
Not that I'm aware. Well, yes and no. I mean, it was all in the context of the difficulty that Catholics had in England at that time, because they were suspected of being loyal to a pope in Rome rather than to the King of England. Of course, most of England was part of the English Church, and the king was not only the head of the state, but the head of the Church of England as well. And many of the same issues we have nowadays. We'll pause for a helicopter.
Okay. Sorry about that. We can pick it up anywhere, actually.
All right, so we were talking about the move of the capital from St. Mary City to Annapolis, and the fact that that was in the context of the fall of grace, if you will, of the Calvert family, who were English Catholics, a turn of tide in English politics towards intolerance and there were both political and religious issues, but all of which resulted in the Calverts no longer being the proprietary owners of the Maryland colony. It became a royal colony with a royal governor appointed. The Calverts were allowed to keep their lands, but no longer collected taxes and no longer were the leaders of the council of Maryland politics. So
All right.
we're starting with the end.
No,
Starting with the end.
Politics aside. All right, let's, okay. Captain, tell us about the Dove, the Maryland Dove, what it is, and what it was,
Sure.
what this is, and what you're trying to do.
Well, we'll start with the Maryland Dove. This ship is a recreation of a mid-17th century merchant ship. The sort of ship that traded with the Maryland colony in the heyday of St. Mary's City as the capital, the 1660s and 70s. So this ship is a recreation of a small tobacco ship, trading ship of that time period. Our mission is to be a tool for education, to teach about the maritime trade and transport of the colony, how it was that people got around on our waterways, and the fact that the waterways were the main way of getting around, and particularly to carry cargo. Our mission is also to talk about the foundings of the Maryland colony, 1634, the voyage of the Ark and the Dove, the two ships that brought colonists to Maryland. It was, of course, on the Ark, the larger ship, that virtually all of the colonists, all those who stayed in the colony, were quartered, that their goods and passengers all were on the Ark. The Dove was brought along because they needed a small ship to be maneuverable, something that could get into the shallower waters, maneuver in the bays and sounds. And so a small ship like this was brought, the Dove, to explore the bay, explore the lower Potomac, and find, trade with, or negotiate with the Indians to have the rights to settle at St. Mary's City, what we now call St. Mary's City, and to also to transport, carry cargo to trade with other ports, other colonies. For example, in the fall of 1634, the Maryland colony had a surplus of corn and sent it to New England, Boston. Governor Winthrop in Boston actually has recorded the presence of the Dove, what they called the Dove, to bring goods from Maryland to trade, and they picked up a cargo of lumber and fur and brought it back to Maryland.
Now we're talking about the Ark and the Dove. How many people could each carry?
The Dove, as a small ship with a 40-ton capacity, carried trade goods from England, and a crew of 7 with one indentured servant, probably an 8th person who was an indentured servant. The master, Richard Orchard, purchased the contract or the indenture, so this servant would have had to serve the master on the voyage over, so he would have been part of the crew on the voyage over. But then the master, Orchard, could sell that contract or indenture to one of the gentlemen colonists here upon arrival, and so this indentured servant then stayed with the colony and would have served a master for the remainder of his indenture, whether it was a 4 or 7 year indentures were common, so that the balance of that 7 years, this person worked for that master. And in those early years of the colony, the indenture servants were awarded land and tools and enough provisions to start themselves on their own farm.
Cool. Now, you know, I look at you're crossing the big ocean in a tiny boat like this. The first land you spot, boom, that's where you're going to settle. St. Mary's City seems to be not quite the first place you come to.
Well, all right. So St. Mary's City is situated on the St. Mary's River, a fairly deep estuary off of the Potomac. And as you come up the Potomac River from the bay, remember that the grant to the Lord Baltimore, the grant to George Calvert, was for the Potomac River and its fisheries and all of that part of Virginia, so-called Virginia, in other words, English lands in North America, north of the Potomac up to the holdings of New Amsterdam, the Dutch colony, what we now call New York, which at that time included New Jersey and parts of the Delaware Bay and River. At any rate, so coming into the bay, they stopped at what we now call Hampton, Virginia. Point Comfort is what they called it. We're joined by Henry Fleet, a fur trader who was trading, who had the trade franchise, if you will, for the Potomac River. And he accompanied them and helped them come up. And so as you come up the Potomac River, your first river you come to in Maryland, they came first to an island, the first good, easily defensible place that they could stop and land and camp. And at that time it was a good harbor, Heron Islands Harbor. So St. Clement's Island is where they first landed and sort of camped out. The Ark stayed anchored while the Dove explored. Now, Fleet knew that they had to go up to what's now Accokeek to meet the emperor, if you will, of the local tribes. But they also knew, Fleet knew, and the Indians knew, that the first good deep harbor was the St. Mary's River, and that there was high ground overlooking the St. Mary's River, which had fresh water. It had a somewhat depopulated Indian hamlet, which already had fields and tillage with corn, shelters that were sparsely used, and a situation where the Indians were subject to raiding by the Susquehannock Indians, a more warlike tribe to the north. So was it to the advantage of the Indian emperor to have these white men with their guns between them and the Susquehannocks? So for many reasons, St. Mary's City was a good place both from the Indians' perspective and from the white men's perspective, who were more worried about the Spanish coming to raid and stamp out English colonies. It was high ground, it was defensible. They had water, source of water. They already had shelter and food. Great place. So that's how St. Mary's came to be the place where they settled.
All right. On a personal note now, how long you've been doing this, and how'd you land a gig like this?
All right. Well, I've been playing with boats all my life. As a teenager, I learned sailing at a place called Mystic Seaport, and got really hooked on the history as well. So I've been either doing rigging work or sailing in a historical and educational context since the early 70s. I did go to school and have a degree in geography and historical archaeology, but like the bumper sticker says, I'd rather be sailing. And so I worked for several years in the windjammer trade, got a license for sailing vessels, and worked in educational sailing ships, doing mainly educational trips up and down the East Coast. But when I got married and it was time to come ashore, I came back to museums and have been working either at Plymouth Plantation with the Mayflower replica or here ever since. Came here to the Maryland Dove in '89. So what's it been, 22 years that I've been on board the Dove.
Okay, so it's 89, not 1689.
Correct, 1989.
All right, you've had a little ways to handle the ship, and what are your thoughts about taking it across the ocean? And
Sure.
what would have been their concerns? They were with the bigger ship, and how much bigger was the Ark?
Sure.
And sure, you bring the little boat to maneuver around, but out in the ocean, how does the big ship help the little? That type of thing. We'll wait.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're
So we're talking about the relative sizes of the ships.
how it handles, how it would handle in the
Sure.
ocean, the concerns they might have had, and
All right. Well, this ship, the Maryland Dove, a recreation of a 17th century ship, is made to be authentic. And with this ship, we not only get to teach the history lessons, but we get to teach ourselves, we get to experiment and learn about the techniques of sailing used in the 17th century. So we're preserving that skill of 17th century seamanship. This is a small ship. It means that she does not meet our modern standards of safety for crossing oceans. However, it's certainly bay-worthy, and so we do sail it throughout the Chesapeake and its connected waters. We've been as far south as Norfolk and as far east as Lewis, Delaware, as far north as Philadelphia, all through connected, protected waters. I would not personally want to take this ship on a deep ocean trip. She's higher than our modern vessels, has more windage. Do not know that she is as stable as our modern ships need to be safe by our modern standards. So, as a modern person, I would not take this ship on a deep ocean voyage. However, in the 17th century, they had no other options. They needed a small ship here to explore the bay. This ship is big enough to cross the ocean. Even today we cross the ocean in smaller vessels. So compared to the Ark, however, the Ark would have been much safer, and virtually all the passengers came on the Ark, a 400-ton ship, 120 to 130 feet long. If you could choose what size ship to go on, you would choose the larger ship. Everybody who paid or whose passage was paid came on the larger vessel.
would there be any kind of sailing techniques that the smaller ship would have to do to keep up with the larger ship?
Well, yes, and part of the danger of traveling in company, a smaller ship with a bigger ship, is just naturally a little slower than that big ship, particularly when it's breezy. So the small ship would have to carry a lot of sail. They would have to push hard, or carry a press of sail to keep up, which adds to the danger because they're working closer to the limits of what is safe or doable with that smaller ship.
Okay, so the Maryland Dove, why the Eastern Shore?
Sure. All right, well, we're here in Salisbury to do a couple of days of school tours and a couple of days of exhibit. We're here to tell the story of Maryland's founding and of trade and transport on the water in the 17th century, Maryland's earliest years. We, of course, are normally an exhibit at Historic City, the Museum of Maryland's first capital, but it's difficult particularly for the school children, to get over to the Western Shore. We're well over a 2-hour drive. We do have school field trips with about a 2-hour range to St. Mary's, but that means that Queen Anne County is about the furthest that normally come to see us. However, we are a state vessel. We do serve as many of Maryland's school children as we can, and so it's appropriate that we bring the ship to Salisbury, Cambridge, St. Michael's, even we've been to Crisfield, so that we serve as many constituents in Maryland as possible.
And you get to sail it.
Yes, absolutely. Again, part of our purpose is to keep skills alive. A museum is a place where skills as well as artifacts are preserved, and sailing and maintaining this vessel helps preserve those skills and techniques. So having an authentic wooden vessel and maintaining it helps preserve those skills, which are still useful today, and as oil and petroleum products get expensive, we may go back to more wooden ships and some of the people who've worked with us will be among the people who can help pass on those skills of woodworking and working with wooden ships. The decks we're standing on, for example, are pine wood, and the cracks between the boards have to be caulked, which is a technique for filling in the seams with fibrous material called oakum, made from hemp fibers, and then covering over with pitch, which makes a waterproof joint. It's a skill that takes a bit of practice to develop, and so caulkers are few and far between nowadays. But for us, the process of keeping the rainwater out of our hull, out of our decks, does preserve that skill. Just one example of some of the skills. Likewise, the rope work. These locks and tackles, the knots that are used, sheet bend, for example, here on this main halyard. It's a 3-part purchase or block and tackle, and it's a rope stropped block, and the skills of stropping and the little wrapping of twine here is known as a seizing. The wrapping on the end of the rope is known as a whipping. And all of these are skills that are preserved, learned and preserved by our staff and our volunteers who help us maintain the ship.
Captain, if I can get you back over here.
Sure.
Let's see. All right. You get her out under sail. Some of the things as a captain.
Sure.
What types of things? I know you're responsible for everything.
Sure.
So, what on a typical sail?
All right.
Some of the things you need to make sure happen.
Sure. All right. So what do I do as a captain or a shipmaster to, first of all, plan an expedition or an outreach trip? And then while we're sailing, what are some of the things I'm paying attention to or doing? Well, of course, first of all, in the planning, it's identifying where we go, and both in terms of the navigation, how much time it may take, allowing enough time for variations in weather, delays, and so on. So I set up the timetable, plan a realistic itinerary and timetable for the trip, contact the folks. And here in Salisbury, I have a pretty easy time because we have worked with and continue to work with the Wacomico Historical Society and the NAB Research Center at Salisbury University. And the people we've worked with now for over a decade are still consistently there for us and have hosted us very graciously, helped us organize the school tours, transportation, for example, for all of the school children on this visit, have been paid for by these two institutions and by sponsors that they've recruited, so that there's no cost to the schools or to the children for these school tours. So organizing that, in addition to voyage planning, making sure that the ship is physically ready for the voyage, working with my bosun, who is also my cook, to plan our meals and our provisioning, making sure that all of that is ready, recruiting the crew and scheduling the crew. These are some of the preparatory things. And then while we're sailing, of course, I'm watching the weather. I set up the crew on watches so people each have a job, and there's a rotation so that nobody has to do their job all day long or for the whole voyage. And of course, keeping track of, as a sailor I know said, where the ship is, keeping the ship off the rocks, keeping the people on the ship, and getting the ship to where it needs to be. So some of the things about navigation and safety that we always pay attention to minute by minute as we sail along.
And is it a blast?
It's almost always fun. Almost always fun. Even when the weather is inclement, we manage to have a good time.
How much respect do you have for the 17th century voyagers who crossed the ocean in this vessel
Sure.
without the uses of smartphones,
Sure.
GPS?
Well, sailing the Dove, of course, is a real lesson in history for us on a very real level, on a very hands-on level. And so we develop a great respect for the ship and nature, the wind and so on, and of course for the people who never had the option of turning a key and pressing a button to start a diesel engine, who had to anchor and wait for the right wind. We developed a very keen appreciation for all that our forefathers did to carry on transportation, get the colonists here, carry on the trade around the bay, completely under sail. It was a very different world, and we become ever more keenly aware of some of the differences and the privileges that we have in our modern age.
So after about 2 weeks on the boat, though, it's good to get back to the modern amenities.
Well, yes, indeed. We are people of the 21st century, and we do stay connected, and so we even will do things like carry a cell phone. And I have to say, you know, in the 20 years that I've been doing this, we've seen it change, you know, from being very much out of touch while we're on the ship to now being able to be in touch, and it just makes our work much easier, makes our job easier.
Or visit, or donate.
Sure.
And we'll wait for the ambulance to go by. But they know this is a hospital zone and they need to be quiet.
Really? All right. Well, to learn more about the Maryland Dove and Historic St. Mary City, the Museum of Maryland's first capital, a couple of things you can do. One is to go to our website if you have access to a computer, stmarycity.org. Our website includes the museum schedule, when you can visit, and when we're open. Short answer is Wednesday through Sunday, 10 to 5. Special events going on, that sort of thing. You can call us. We have an 800 number, which I don't have on the tip of my tongue.
That's okay, I'll find it. I'll
And
go online and get it.
great.
Let me just change shots here. And,
Okay.
Okay.
And what was the other side of the question?
If you want to sum up the Maryland Dove and its mission, what would you say?
Sure, okay. Well, again, our museum's mission is threefold: to preserve the landscape and the historical remains of Maryland's first capital. That's mission number one, job one. Secondly, to research and learn about, both through documentary research and archaeological research, learn about Maryland's first capital and life in the capital. And thirdly, to educate, to teach about what we've learned about the Maryland colony, its first 60 years, life in Maryland in that time.
Good. Now, how would you like your name to appear on screen? And then what kind of title or should I put with it?
Joseph Greeley,
Can
and
you spell
it's
that last name?
Greeley. Yeah. And I'm the interpretive supervisor for the ship.
All right, first things first. What does an interpretive supervisor do?
I'm in charge of dressing funny and talking to visitors, essentially.
Okay,
It's my
let's
primary.
Let's use the interpretive supervisor is required to dress funny, and I just
Yeah.
think that they won't hear my sentences,
Yeah.
my questions. So if you can incorporate them into your answers,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
So yeah, basically the interpretive supervisor is responsible for addressing funny and talking to visitors. Also program development, research, making sure that the information we're giving to visitors is correct, explaining the difference between the Dove and the Maryland Dove, because there are differences. And when we're on outreach, organizing, the field trips, our education department organizes, but basically I'm responsible for, plotting out where things are going to go and how the flow is going to move, because flow is very important. You don't want to have the kids getting backed up to each other.
Now you brought up differences, so now I'm going to have to ask you about those differences.
All right.
So if you can just
Sure.
give me those differences.
Well, the Maryland Dove, the vessel we're standing on, was commissioned in 1975 by the museum. She was basically a bicentennial project off to a late start. In 75, the only thing that was actually visible at the museum was the State House, which they rebuilt in 1934 for the tercentennial. They had done some archaeological work, but they really hadn't done enough to determine where things were, the layout of the town. And rather than build a bunch of buildings that would turn out to be wrong, they decided that a ship would be a good exhibit because maritime trade was vital to Maryland's survival. The tobacco crop went to England for the most part and got manufactured goods and luxury items. But there also was trade with the other colonies. They did not ask the designer, William Baker, for a replica of the Dove initially. What they asked him for was a small cargo ship, big enough to be an ocean-going vessel, small enough they could afford to build and maintain it. He designed them this vessel. Then they started raising money and realized very quickly it would be easier to raise money for a ship named after the Dove than something random like the Maryland Merchant, which was one of the early proposed names. So the Maryland Dove is a 40-ton, that's the cargo capacity, 3-masted vessel. She would need a crew of 9 if you're actually operating in the 1600s. The real Dove was also a 40-ton vessel, so she would have been very similar in size, not just exactly the same dimensions, but close enough, but almost certainly a 2-masted ketch rig with a mizzen and a mainmast rather than a mizzen, main, and foremast, as we have. She only had 7 crew, and with that number of crew and this size vessel, that's a much more logical rig for her to have. But essentially, the Dove and the Maryland Dove, in modern terminology, are basically mid-sized panel vans, the sort of thing we use for local deliveries. Now, local in this case would be anywhere from New England, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, the West Indies, Central America, anywhere along the seaboard. And if they thought they could make more money going to England than Boston, Barbados, they would go. She's by no means too small to cross the Atlantic, and if there's a reason to do so, or if there's money to be made doing it, they would. It didn't happen as often as it did with bigger vessels, but they did it more often than you might think. The original Dove, the one that came over in 1634, was purchased and brought to Maryland to serve the colony in Maryland. They did not need her to carry anything across the Atlantic because the Ark, the other ship, was a 400-ton ship as opposed to 40 tons for the Dove and the Maryland Dove. So that is a sizable vessel. That is more than enough space for about 140 colonists and everything you need to start a colony, but it's also too big to be any use once you get here. You know, we don't keep moving vans once we've moved, we give them back to the moving company. So the Ark got the colonists here, and then in August 1634, she departed for England. The Dove was actually purchased by Leonard Calvert and the investors so that once the Ark had left, they'd have a ship to use. The first thing they did with her after their arrival was in the fall of 1634, they loaded her with corn and sent her up to Boston to trade that for salt cod. So unlike Plymouth and Jamestown, Maryland actually had a surplus of food at the end of their first year. The following summer, they loaded her with furs and timber and sent her back to England, and unfortunately she was never heard from again. So she did disappear at sea. We don't know why. The only evidence we have is that the original crew that brought her over and took her up to Boston, when they got back from Boston, they basically jumped ship. They deserted the vessel in a dispute over their wages. They sailed back to England on another vessel. They sued Cecil Calvert, or Baltimore, for their wages. One of the charges they made was that the ship was not fitted for the voyage, that she was in bad condition. So that may certainly have been a factor, but on the other hand, they're trying to win a court case. They're not going to know, no, the ship was perfectly fine, we just didn't feel like sailing her anymore. So, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong at sea. You know.
Speaking of those things that could go wrong at sea, anything you've run into on this in your voyages? Well, how long have you been doing this? And then incorporate that other question.
I've been the interpretive super at St. Mary's City. It'll be 10 years on Monday. Before that, I was maritime curator for Charlestown Landing, and I've worked on a number of different vessels. The Maryland Dove, Will is a very careful captain. If it's really dangerous, we're not going to go out. But we've had her out coming back from Lewis, Delaware back in 2006 on the leg from Annapolis down to Solomons. It was blown about 20-25, and we were running before the wind, which is sort of the best point of sail for the ship. And at one point, we hit 9 knots for a very brief period. So that wasn't like dangerous, but it was pretty exciting. It's a good speed for a ship this size. On other vessels, I worked on a schooner that was going around Cape May, and I was down below off watch, and I suddenly realized that I wasn't really lying on my bunk, as I was lying in the corner of the bunk and the side of the ship. And I was about ready to leap for the hatchway when she came back, and after that we decided we weren't going to try and go around the Cape that day. We were going to go into Cape May and lay up until the wind calmed down.
What kind of, the workings of the vessel. What are some of the things sailors need to do? And
Well, in the 1600s, the sailor's life is a lot of time spent loading and unloading cargo, and then sailing the vessel. And of course, there's handling the ship. The basic operations when you're actually maneuvering are tacking or wearing, turning the ship to catch the wind so that you can try and get her where you want her to go rather than when the wind is pushing you or where the ship wants to go. And that's for a small ship like this one, especially with this rig, that's really an all-hands operation. You really need enough men that you can have men tending the sails on the mainmast and the foremast, because the sequence when you're tacking, when you bring the ship around, is you have to put the helm down. That brings the bow up into the wind. When the bow passes through the wind, the first command is mainsail haul, so the sails in the main are taken and switched from one side to the other, and then they're tightened down again, and then the sails on the foremast are stay where they are, because at that point the wind's pushing against them, so that will push the ship's head further around, and once the main starts to fill, they'll let go and haul, and the sails on the fore are brought around, and at that point the ship is off sailing in a new direction. This particular ship is very handy that way, but a lot of square rig vessels, especially the larger ones, that was a much more difficult maneuver, so they would wear instead, which is basically tacking is doing this, wearing is doing that. So it's much easier on the ship, but you lose ground when you're doing it.
now we caught you up in the rigging. How are you with the heights and
I'm not afraid of heights, I'm afraid of falling. I really like working aloft. I work mainly in the topsails, the upper sails on the ship. The lower sails, we have foot ropes that you stand on when you're furling and unfurling the sails. And when you're standing on the foot rope, ideally the yard should be about belly level. So you're kind of leaning your belly on the yard and leaning over. I have very short legs in proportion to the rest of me. When I stand on the foot ropes, the yard is here, so it makes it a little bit more difficult. But it's a lot of fun. I love being aloft. Another vessel I worked on, the brig Niagara, her mainmast is 118 feet, and I used to go up to the main topmast cap, which is about 80, 90 feet above the water, and just sit up there whenever I could, because it was great. You're sitting up there and you're basically, the ship's moving and you're doing a big arc. I think it's awesome. You get a great view, and it's a lot of fun.
what do you hope to bring to the school children and the other people here on the Eastern?
Well, really a sense of what it was like to live in Maryland in the 1600s and how important ships were to their survival. As I said, Maryland lived and died by maritime trade. Tobacco was a valuable crop enough that they didn't have any real industry here. Everything had to be imported, and so the arrival of the ships was a big deal. It's news. It's like having Walmart draw up to your door, and that you can only do that every basically once a year. The ships would arrive from England in the fall, they'd winter over, and then they'd sail back to England in the spring with a tobacco crop. So imagine only being able to do shopping once a year, only getting the CNN once a year. It's a big deal. And the effort that our ancestors went through to get here.
That's a good point. I like that Walmart line.
Yeah.
Last thing, the capacity. This was a cargo ship.
Yeah, she's 40 tons capacity. Now that's not 42,000 pound weights. A ton for them is 252 gallons of French wine. It was a cask, what we call a barrel, 6 foot high and 4 foot wide. And that was a really important unit in the trade between England and France, because wine, they didn't drink water unless they had to. And that became the standard for measuring ships to determine port duties and other fees. But it's a calculated figure. So it's the length of the keel multiplied by the beam, multiplied by the depth of hold, and then divided by 100. So it's volume. And even today, it's still the case for a merchant vessel. A modern ton is 10 by 10 by 10. So, but it's not too far off in terms of the weight. We have about 30 tons of ballast of weight in the bottom of the ship, and honestly another 10 tons would be helpful. It's not essential for our operations, but it would make a bit of a difference when we're sailing her.
Because where you sit in the water.
Yeah, right now she's a little tender. She tends to heal a little bit more easily than is desirable. Like I said, it's not a factor for us. It's not, we're not going out in anything that would make us capsize. But we have had the main channel in the water before, and so that's a pretty good heal to the ship. Another 10 tons would make it a little bit more stable. If we were trying to get passenger certification for the ship, which could be done, but again, we would definitely need to add that ballast to make her more stable. In the 1600s, you wanted the ship kept at about the same weight as much as possible, because if it's too light, she'll be unstable. If she's too heavy, she won't be roll enough. She'll be really stiff, and that will make the ship work too hard. It'll put too much strain on her. So it's a very fine calculation. With cargo, it's always tempting to put more in, because the more you carry, the more money you make. But if you put too much in, you put the ship at risk. Whereas if it's too light, again, you go out there and you get the Swedish warship Vasa, which went down in 1628. Was too light. She was on her maiden voyage down Stockholm Harbor. She got caught in a squall. She got knocked on her beam ends right over on her side, filled and went right down. And sat on the bottom for 300 years until she was discovered again in the 50s, then brought up to the surface. So,
all right. Anything that I didn't mention that might be of interest to our audience? You got to be, I guess, efficient in knots and
yes,
and ropes. Were you a Boy Scout? What? How were you able to?
Well, my first word was boat. I have a master's degree in maritime history and nautical archaeology from East Carolina University, which is not a prerequisite for the job. It certainly didn't hurt. But I also have sailing experience on a number of other vessels as well. So.
Good. And thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Turn it on. Could you say something for me?
Sure. Well, one question.
Sorry. I didn't know if I turned the microphone on or not.
All right. Well, one question we get a lot, and natural curiosity, is, well, where did they go to the bathroom? And the answer is, the reason the bathroom on a ship is still called the head today is because the bathroom is in the beak's head, the triangular platform up forward. It's mainly for handling the spritsail, which is a small square sail under the bowsprit, but it's also a convenient place to locate what they referred to as the seat of ease. Basically, that was the polite term for it. It's a wooden box with a hole in the top, and the debris, so to speak, would just drop straight into the water. By locating up forward like that, the wind is generally coming from the sides or back, so the wind is blowing the smell away. Waves splashing up will help keep it clean, although if you misbehave, one of the minor punishments is cleaning the head. Now, on larger vessels, like if you see the Constellation up in Baltimore or the Constitution up in Boston, they have the little bay windows at the stern. That's the captain's head. He gets to have privacy. The rest of the crew just has to sit out there and run. But we are the only 17th century vessel in the U.S. that actually has a seat of ease out on the beak's head. It is non-functional because it's not only illegal, it's also rather nasty. But that is what it would look like. There's just no opening beneath it to let the debris fall through.